I think this is a great topic for us to discuss. And there's a saying that if you solve a problem for space, you solve a lot of problems on Earth. So I think the more we are involved in space exploration and the more we're involved in trying to solve problems for space, we'll see that there's a lot of ways that it helps us here on the surface. So yeah, I think this is a great topic for us to venture into, and the more we venture into it, we'll see how it impacts us, and probably that way encourage us to be more active in it.
Oh, great. Thank you, Toby. Farmer, I think you have a bit of time though. So Toby, you've really kept this very brief, so we have more time, and
Oh,
if you have more to say about
oh,
the
sorry,
topic, you can always come
I,
back because we started the session now.
okay, I thought that maybe there's some questions that are going to be asked to us to discuss, or is just the general, um, I'm sorry, I'm just a little, wanted to know if you're going to ask us questions, or is it that I should just talk about just space in general?
Yeah, so we're supposed to start with individual reflections on the team before we go to discussion session. So yeah, if you don't have anything more to say, we'll just have from Farmer and from David as well, and then we'll have the dialogue, the panel session where we're going to do the Q&A.
Okay, well, yeah, maybe after Fama and other ones go, I can probably circle back and speak a little bit more about different things.
Absolutely, absolutely. Let's go to Farmer, and yeah, we're still on the call, so yes, we can definitely have you later. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Nelly, and thank you so much, Toby, for kickstarting the session today. So I'm very happy to be here and to talk about a team that I'm actually very passionate about. And as Nelly said, this is not a very conventional topic, especially for Africans within the like space industry. So often when we talk about living in space, it feels far removed from the realities of Africa and the continent we live in. For a start, we live in a region where more than, let's say, 600 million people do not have access to electricity. We face the daily impacts of climate change, and for so many countries and communities are actually struggling to deal with climate issues, access to limited technology, and all of those things. So it's a bit interesting when Africans start talking about those issues related to humans living in space when we have all of these crises within the continent itself. But today I'll be approaching this topic from a place of curiosity and from a place of being optimistic that, hey, there's so many problems that we currently have, but there's so many ways that we can optimize this system to make sure that we are prepared for the future that we have. So at first, it really seems like a contradiction, but I believe this is an opportunity for Africa by pursuing space ambition while also addressing our urgent needs here on Earth. Africa is positioning itself in a very unique way. We have to understand for a start, living in space is not about leaving the planet behind, but it's also about what we learn in the process. For example, it can be clean energy systems that can operate in harsh environments, sustainable food products that does not depend on, let's say, rich soil on Earth, and medical technologies that, for example, can help human beings to adapt to better conditions, especially conditions living in Earth. So we have to understand from the perspective that every challenge that we deal with living beyond Earth can push us to innovate in ways that can improve here our life on Earth. So for context, when we speak about living in space, we're really talking about making life more sustainable here on Earth. So to put more things in perspective, especially for maybe people that are not within the space industry, so far there's over 40,000 satellites orbiting Earth, and the space industry right now is over $600 billion. And I'm excited to see that Africa for instance, is no longer just sitting on the sideline. So far we have, let's say, launched more than 67 satellites across 18 countries, showing that the vision we have itself can become action. We have to understand these satellites in a way give us influence and independence. For example, climate monitoring helps African nations strengthen their voice when it comes to global environmental negotiation, and also assisting in local farmers in predicting droughts and flood. In so many ways, space technology is already shaping better policies and protecting lives, but we have to understand the potential can even go further. These the same technologies that will sustain human life in space, such as renewable energy, waste recycle, and water recovery itself, are exactly the ones we need most across the continent itself. So if we invest in them now, we can also adopt this system to improve, for example, off-grid living, farming, and healthcare in Africa. So exploring beyond Earth is not just about humanity's future in space itself. It is also about developing solutions that can make life more sustainable here on Earth. There's the saying that space is for everyone, but personally, I believe that we have a very long way to go. We know that history itself has shows like unequal access for Africa, and we know the history of colonization, especially within the continent. So for me, inclusion means participation and not just being observation, especially the way space is making progress. It's important that we have a seat at the table, shaping how humanity especially explore beyond Earth. When, for example, African scientists, engineers, and thinkers contribute, the outcomes become richer and fairer. Our resilient community spirit and creativity bring lessons that the world urgently needs, and also space exploration beyond Earth. It's important that as humanity, especially, is preparing to live beyond Earth, that deep questions arises. Who owns who? Who owns what? And what value each country is bringing or continent is bringing into this? I believe Africa's history of colonization and exclusion give us a moral voice to guide this new chapter differently. I believe we can lead in championing fairness, cooperation, and sustainability in so many ways. So history itself does not repeat. I believe one thing that the Western world especially can learn from us is the spirit of Ubuntu. I am because we are, that we can use especially in exploring life beyond Earth. And I believe as Africa is evolving, especially within the space industry, that us leading by principles are not just enough. It's important that we need and have capabilities. And in so many ways, Africa diverse landscape is one thing that SARS does. For example, it's potentially places and test bed for future space systems, from closed loop support to renewable energy and robotics. Through projects using satellites, drones, and sensors, we're already learning how to live sustainably in harsh environment. The same technologies will one day sustain life beyond Earth in solving for Africa as we prepare for space. It's important to imagine, for example, an Africa that can help design the first sustainable human habitat beyond Earth, an Ubuntu habitat powered by renewable energy, recycling every drop of water, and built on principle of fairness and cooperation. It's important to imagine moments where African engineers and researchers themselves testing these systems in the Sahara, or African astronauts carrying this vision to the moon or Mars. It's important, especially for Africa, to reach a point where living beyond Earth is no longer a science fiction, but a continuation of the work we already begun if we keep moving with clarity and purpose. So I believe by this time, you guys are maybe reflecting on the question, if I do support the idea of human settlement beyond Earth. Yes, I do, but with condition. And that is if it's done ethically, responsibly, and it uproots everyone and not just a few. Africa's path into space should not repeat the mistake of the past, which is very important. It should model a new form of stewardness, one that combines innovation with empathy and progress with purpose. Space will test our technology in so many ways, but it will also test humanity. And perhaps Africa's greatest contribution will be the reminder that to live anywhere, we must first live together. And thank you, guys.
Wow, that was nothing short of inspiring, Farmer. Thank you so much. I think I would have to stick up the last statement. To live anywhere, we have to live together. That's absolutely beautiful. Thanks for your contribution. You've made it quite.
Nelly, you're muted.
Yeah, I saw. Thanks, guys. Okay, wow. And I gave a very brilliant speech on how wonderful Farmer's presentation was and how I was going to stick up to live anywhere, we have to live together on my wall. Sorry. Okay, yes, that is what I was saying. Thank you so much, Farmer, for your points and just making it quite clear that you support human settlement in space as long as it's done ethically. And I think I'm very curious as to why you brought the post-colonial problem that we have to the conversation. And I'm very curious and very happy, actually, because I thought maybe no one was going to mention that. But it's very important that we don't shy away from this because it brings another dynamic, which is colonialism comes with exploitation. And we saw the pattern and the positioning of the West when Africa was colonized. And the whole idea of living in space, exploring, going to distant lands, doesn't that sound very familiar? And how do we, like, as Africans, avoid this? So let's continue this interesting conversation. So over to you, David. Do you want to share your thoughts on the topic? If you have any slides, you can present or just go off ahead.
No, this is one of those topics where you do not want to be so academic.
Oh, yeah.
And I feel like slides are the most academic thing that someone can start on. It's always better to speak raw and from the heart when it comes to something like this, a topic which I have very, very deep interest in. So allow me to speak from the heart. Someone said that.
Absolutely, David, speak from the heart. Sorry, I didn't
Yes.
introduce you guys fully because I wanted you guys to also maybe give a bit of a background about yourself. We'll come back to that, Farmer, maybe during the Q&A. So maybe we could start with a general introduction and then you take it off from there.
Oh,
Thank you.
yeah, sure. I greet you all from wherever you're connecting. I am David Kasimante Tandogote, and I'm a Ugandan, an African, specializing in space law and policy. I'm pretty sure Nelly has a much longer bio that she'll probably read at some point. Let me not muddy the waters with so much of an introduction, but rather go a little bit straight to the point. So one of the most striking things about the theme this year that you just put up towards this week, going to space, is that that theme shows, if you see that it was showing this astronaut person with a younger astronaut, an older and a younger astronaut, right? And they are walking hand in hand, and probably this dystopian area somewhere out there. And the question is, okay, so what exactly does this mean for us as Africa? Now, admittedly, my understanding of space and in fact, my thoughts on this will be a little bit, should I say, not biased, but sort of towards the angle of a space law policy practitioner, okay? Someone who deals with policies and laws on a daily basis. one of the aspects of a law is that a law should reflect the soul and society that it seeks to serve, right? If it doesn't reflect the soul and the soul, if it doesn't reflect the soul and heart of that society, then that law in and of itself will be ineffective and it should be disbanded by the society. Now, on that note, when we say living in space, I would like for us to first understand the terms. When you say living in space, from what angle are you looking at this concept of living in space? Who are you telling about living in space? If I walked to the village and I spoke to my grandmother and I said, we are thinking of living in space, she'll look at me like a mad person. And the reason for that is not that she does not understand space, but rather she will think, what do you mean living in space? Haven't we been living in space? Why? Because to most traditional African people, to most Africans, life, the source of sustenance is the source of life. In Africa, we have been engaged with space for years, for millennia. Okay? So space is not a new thing to Africa. Africans have interacted with space from the nomads to the stargazers to even astronomy itself. Space has been woven in lifeblood, very sinews of the muscle continent are written in the stars. When we talk about living in space, you need to understand that our fathers have constantly looked to the stars for not just guidance, but for life itself, determining seasons. For example, looking at the stars wrongly can be the difference between a hungry stomach those who work with nomads, if you do not know how to read the stars, you could easily get lost. From the Sahara to the Namib deserts to the Africans have constantly used space for millennia, right? So having understood that, now we need to examine what we mean by living in space. Is it from the area of life affecting us from space, something that my sister just talked about, farmer, making life easier on Earth, or are we really looking at it from what I would think is more of a Eurocentric or Western-centric idea that we need to physically go to space for us to understand that we're living in space, which kind of brings me to that graphic, that whoever came up with the graphic understood that living in space, to them, in their worldview, living in space means sending actual astronauts out there. Living in space can be both. It can be sending actual astronauts out there, like my sister Fama, or it could actually mean making the life that we have here on Earth much more bearable using space resources. Okay. There is in the book Alice in Wonderland, there's a part where Alice reaches this forked road, and she asks a rabbit, "Which way should I go?" And the rabbit asked her, "Where do you want to go?" And she said, "I don't know." And the rabbit said, "Well, does it matter which road you take then? Which kind of leads me to that understanding that if you don't know where you're going, then any road will lead you there. Mhm. And for the Christians, there's a part where uh, the Lord Jesus asks this rhetoric question: how can two walk together unless they agree? Which then leads me to a very crucial point: agreement. Agreement. Most, if not all, the rules that determine what happens in space currently, that the international community has come to agree on and to move with, most, if not all of them, were agreed upon at a time when little to no African was at that table. For the lawyers, there's something called a treaty. A treaty is basically an agreement between states which binds them, you know. And for a treaty to come into place, that treaty is a result of long negotiations. Negotiations by all sorts of ambassadors, all sorts of dignitaries. They come and they don't negotiate, they compromise. They concede and compromise. This is what treaty making really is all about: concession and compromise. So these entities come together, they concede and they compromise on a number of things, and they come up with these agreements, and then these agreements start binding all those who have signed it, including our post-colonial fathers, who I believe in many ways were so excited, they decided to sign these agreements, which now bind us to the God knows how many generation. But mind you, our fathers were not on the negotiating table. Many of them indeed arrived late. And we have a proverb where I come from, that the one who arrives late will eat the tail. Africa, in many ways, got the tail end of the deal, a very raw, bad deal. That said, that deal is what colleagues who were at the table now use to determine what we are going to do living in space. We did not, you can say we did not exactly agree. Why? Because we were not part of the negotiation. We're not there. And because we're not part of that negotiation, we cannot be sure that we and our colleagues who are at the table are in agreement. So then, if we are to interrogate this question of going to space, the question is going to be, if we are going to live in space, like my friend Farmer just mentioned, that, you know, if you're going to be together, you have to live together, you have to agree. The question is, on what terms, on whose terms are we going to live, physically live in outer space, if that's what we are going to go with? On whose terms? What is the compromise and concession that we need for us to properly say that we are living with our neighbor in outer space? That compromise and that concession should be the first thing now. So when this topic was being brought up by the World Space Week, I wonder how many Africans were in the room. As a policy person, I have attended meetings, and I'll be honest with you, where major decisions on Africa were being made, and I could tell you were only two or even sometimes one African in that room. And we were not on the agenda to even speak. So, was there an African in that room? And what was their perspective on this living in space thing? Those are rhetorical questions that I believe the audience can start to answer on their own. Okay? If indeed there was no African in that room, perhaps we need to find an African compromise and concession that will determine what living in space means for us. The beautiful thing is, as Fama mentioned, and indeed expressed in most of these laws, space belongs to everyone. Space belongs to everyone. So if it needs us to develop an indigenous framework on what living in space means, then let's do it. But I can assure you, with not a shade of doubt, and I am the most conservative person in any room that you enter, but I can assure you that most of the decisions regarding space and living in space and engaging with space are done from a very selfish place by those who are on the table. The very same way that our lands were not consulted before our lands were cut and served out on a table somewhere in Berlin by a man with a mustache called Otto von Bismarck and his buddies, where they sat somewhere and decided what they are going to do with the lands that our fathers lived on. And whatever they did, we are following to this day. So it is with space. We are not on the table when these deals are being made, but I can assure you the decisions that are made in those rooms are going to affect us all. So what I would propose is some kind of indigenous framework on what living in space in fact means. I would suggest that the African Space Agency comes up with some kind of, it could even just be an essay competition for Africans. What exactly does living in space mean for you and your grandmother? Because it's not just the young people; it's also our grandmothers. Are we living in space? I don't know. They have to be. They have to be there. We need to sit around the bonfire of wisdom with them somewhere on the moon. Perhaps it's possible. But what does that mean for us? So far, what I mean for me as an African is that space has always been the canvas of humanity, which we have used for time immemorial as Africans. Okay? So as Africans, we lived in space before the World Space Week came up with this theme. We lived in space, we are living in space, and we shall live in space long after this theme is done. But if our brothers believe in a different way of living in space, how can we agree? How can we move with them? And what are going to be our concessions and our compromises regarding that? And are they willing to step with us onto that table so that we can compromise and concede? If that is impossible, then perhaps the whole concept of living in space will remain an abstract idea for most Africans. Thank you all for listening to me.
Thank you so much, David, for that very passionate position, spoken like a true African and lawyer, particularly. So thank you very much for saying all of that. There's a lot to unpack, like we say, it's very nuanced. So you were very evasive, David, in a way. So you spoke a lot about deals and the table without so much of a context. So what's going to happen when we start the discussion session? You might have to give us some very, good empirical evidence of some of these things you're saying, maybe mention some of the treaties for the benefit, because I know to an extent what you're talking about. I have an idea here and there to what you're referring to, but not everybody in the room, except the person who's very, very, very abreast with space governance. Not everybody in the room would really get the context of what you're saying. So maybe we are just going to come back to that for more context, particularly. And then secondly, on you talked about the ethical position of us living together under what rules and things like that. Maybe we'll just revisit some of those discussions. So, and I will also share some of my opinions on some of the things you said. Thanks, Farmer, for coming back on the call. And just checking on our dear friend Toby in America. Toby, are you still with us? Checking in. Hi, Toby. You're muted. I don't know. Today we seem to be great. Great. Yeah. So Toby, we'll just take your reflections on the theme. So Farmer has spoken from her perspective as an engineer. She said a lot about habitats and sustainability and food production. Maybe you want to talk from the private or business perspective, from your own perspective, what this theme really means for Africa. Thank you.
Yeah, I think I was kind of just sitting back listening to what we just heard, and it was very good perspective that I think is very important for us. And one of the things that immediately jumped into my mind was the perspective of what living in space means to us. But my mind immediately went to there's a book, and I was trying to find it because it speaks so vividly to our earliest space explorers. And it was a perspective that wasn't really commonplace if you go to the academia as far as astronomy or astrophysics and things like that. And it was describing some of our earliest space explorers as some of the people who dared to even first start to look up and even dare to even do things such as just jump off the ground, climb trees, and look further off into the distance because we are traveling through space. But the example that came to my mind was when we do underwater exploration, and we travel in maybe something to protect ourselves. And we're traveling through the water underwater. And are we not exploring water? Even though we're still on the surface of something or inside of a capsule, we're exploring water. But I think is the perspective of when you say space exploration, what does it look like? Some people are determining space exploration by how far away from our safety base are we, and then they'll consider that as space exploration. So when I'm looking at the water, because I do scuba diving, and when you're scuba diving, you're exploring, the underwater, but how far away from your safety net are you going, the tether rope away? Some people consider you're not exploring water until you're away from safety, and the Earth is our safety, and it's traveling through space. So, I think it's very important that we bring our perspectives in, because I don't know how many of you have done it, but sometimes when I was younger, I would lay down on the ground, just look up into the skies on a very clear night, and then just allow myself to understand that we are traveling through space. And modern science will tell us we're traveling at extraordinary rates through space. So we are exploring space from the safety of our spaceship, our Earthship. So I was really enjoying the perspective there. And from a business standpoint, I agree a lot. There's a lot of selfish motives for space exploration. Can we exploit the mines to make more money? Is essentially taking the same perspectives that has caused a lot of issues on Earth and applying it to space. What can we do to get a monetary value? Sometimes you have a group of people who are really exploring space for making life better on Earth, making life better for themselves, understanding where we come from, and expanding our world and universal view. But then you have groups that are like, this is just an out to make more money. And if you would allow me to, I would like to make a very basic comparison with music. You have the artists who enjoy music and they will make music that inspires, that resonates with us where whatever our walk of life is, that's creative, that causes our brains to fire signals and think differently. And then you have other musicians who are in it specifically for the money. And then the music quality is not the same. We can hear the selfishness. We can hear it's not really advancing us in what is capable, what instruments can you combine, what words can you combine to cause a certain sound. So it's really interesting, the perspective. So from the business standpoint, you see a lot of that. Like you can see that a lot in the business world, where you'll see some people who just want to be in space, adventure to just this is a means to an end. Once I make my money, I'm out of the field. I don't really care about space. I don't really care about exploring. I don't really care about the impact. I just see it as a way to make money because it's something new. But then you see other people who are genuinely interested in how does this impact people on Earth? How does it cause us to explore? And one perspective that and I'll kind of share this and then relieve the stage so someone else is. I was at a conference a while back, and there's a lot of exclusive people there that are very prominent in the space industry. And they're talking about ways to explore other solar systems and other stars. And it was very interesting. And it was actually held in Kenya, Africa. And so one of the perspectives that came out that normally wouldn't come out is we were thinking about, okay, we want to build this big machine or some type of satellite and sling it into another solar system. It's going to take 50 years, 60 years to get there, and we can get data. And then a perspective came in from an African, and they said, what if we see light at night? We see, and these stars, the light is coming from different suns and different stars from very distant places. How about we take a plant and we use our a modified telescope and only focus a light from one star to allow one plant to grow? And the way the room kind of just shifted, said, whoa, like they're receiving light composition from one star that's very far away, not our sun, blocking it during the day and only at night, and is only focused on this. So this is the only star light. So this is the light from another solar system causing something. And it was really thinking about that perspective of exploring distant spaces from an African perspective. Like, we don't need to always travel really far to be able to understand from another thing. So I'm just thinking, if more perspectives like that is down, we may discover that we can explore great distances without having to travel the quote unquote traditional way that people have decided that they want to travel. So I want to leave it on that note, that I think the more and just echoing on what David said, or Mr. David said, that if we can define what space exploration looks for ourselves, we may figure out different ways to learn more, or even remember the ways we were learning more about other star systems and other things that will benefit and inform the knowledge that we're doing here on Earth. So I just think that those perspectives that may not be established already, it will get a chance to be established. And I don't think it gets established without us doing things like this, like us having our sessions where we're developing our ideas. Because sometimes we'll have an idea and we want to take it to these other rooms that don't understand that we're in that creative space. Like, again, back to music. If I'm trying to make a new song, I'm not going to go to an established studio who doesn't know me and doesn't this and that. I'm going to go with my crew, my people, and we're going to figure it out. And once that beautiful sound comes out, we go present it to somebody else, like, oh, I understand it. I can hear it now. But if we bring it to these other audiences too soon, they may like, oh, that's a primitive sound. What are you trying to make a, they don't understand that we're in that creative space to figure out how we want to contribute. So it takes time. So I think the more that we can spend time talking to each other and get minds from law, from business, from the academia together to develop our ideas from an African perspective, I think we will be able to articulate our vision in a way that others will understand and want to be involved in. So I think that sometimes we want to jump the stages and steps to be in those rooms with other people. And not to say that we're not, because when I've been in these rooms, we're there. We have the way to get into these rooms and to talk about what space exploration looks like, but sometimes we just have to develop our thoughts and develop our technology in a way that they can understand and people can understand our perspective and what we bring to the table that actually will contribute to the overall success of what we're trying to do. So yeah, I'm very happy and humbled to be a part of this conversation here.
Wow, thank you so much for that perspective. And it's just really interesting to see how, yeah, one person from a different social, cultural, or academic background can just, have a totally different perspective to something, and that provides a solution, which is why it's very important for us to work together. And just building on what I think Fama said, something about living together and collaborating with other people. So yes, the normatively thinking about what living in space would be really different depending on our backgrounds. I think it was David that mentioned the poster being very Eurocentric, I think at the beginning. And what we then have to do is how, like maybe in theorization, to look at different storylines, different framework, different people, and then try to have this holistic background on this is what this concept would mean. I think in the long run, we would always see things differently as people, but then we have to prevent what farmers say, of us being left behind. That's why we should have such conversations. And I hope everyone on the call is learning and is going to take something away from the conversation. So it's time for the dialogue session, for the conversation part of the event. And if you have any question, I'm just going to keep this in a way that I'll be able to see the DMs. If you have any question, please just feel free to raise your hands. We're very happy to take your questions. If you have any contributions as well, you can put your contributions to the chat as well. If you have any clarifications, you can raise your hand if you want to speak, or yeah, feel free to use the chat. So I'll go first. Thank you, Mary. Please just lift your hand up. Yes, if you have any question, just take your hand up and I'll just call everyone. Yeah, according to how you raise your hands. Thank you. So my first question is for everybody. So Toby, if you want to come back in, please. Thank you. I can't see you. And my first question is, why would you like to go to space? So I know that Fama and Toby are interested in going to space. From how David sounded, I am not so sure, but we will hear from him. But Fama, you are a Titan astronaut for 2029, and I'm really rooting for you that really comes through and you get to go, and I'm sure it will be a brilliant experience. But now I'm not asking the benefits of going to space. Why do you want to go to space? Like, what's really inspiring that sort of dream from your end?
Yes. Should I come in or you have Toby coming in?
No. You can go. I can't see Toby just yet.
Yes.
Yeah. So
perfect. Just to start on a personal note, for me, going to space in a way represents the ultimate expression of curiosity and courage, right?
Yeah.
That's the first thing. And the second thing is that I believe as Africans, for me personally, being part of the space industry and going to space is not just about representation and inspiration, but I believe also in building systems, right? Because I believe in a way it creates belief systems where people can see something like that, right? And be able to dream about it, right? Because it's one thing to actually see an astronaut be in space, right? But it's actually another interesting factor to not just see an astronaut, but an astronaut that looks like you, an astronaut that comes from the same background, and most importantly, even speaks the same language as you.
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it goes back to the fact that representation is not just symbolic, it also builds belief, and belief itself builds systems,
Yeah.
right? And in
Absolutely.
Africa, I believe we need the necessary system, especially as we move forward into the new space era.
Yeah, beautifully said. Thank you so much, Faba. That's just a very wonderful idea in terms of tracing from how one person going to space can create a whole chain of events. I think looking back in my life, funny to say, but I really like Neil Armstrong. Like someone went to the moon. It's very like I'm not American, but it feels like a human experience, so to say. When I look up at the moon and I'm like, oh, a human being has been there, it kind of inspires me in a way. But you can see that very large social, cultural, economic, national barrier between me and Neil Armstrong. So just thinking about what that would mean for African children in the next 150 years when they see that an African has actually maybe like gone to outer space. David, there are two sides of this conversation. So just to set the pace, there's the normative and ideological side, which David really spoke to, but we're not saying going to outer space is bad at all. So we're talking about human exploration here for those of you that joined the call, so that we are not anti going to space. So just putting that putting that point out there. So thanks for sharing your points on that, Farmer. Yeah, I think it does resonate with me very much. Toby, do you want to share why you want to go to space?
Yes,
Yeah.
I'm in agreement that it is very inspirational, and I think for me it's the same reason that babies learn to walk. Like to me,
Mm,
it feels like it's the natural next step is that curiosity for space exploration. For example, as I mentioned earlier, I scuba dive, so I go in the water and I get to explore life underwater. So, the first time I dove in the ocean, swimming with life only found under the water was another worldly experience that was scary, but at the
yeah.
same time gave me this like profound appreciation for life on the surface of Earth. Like I can breathe normally, I can all
Yeah,
this safety,
yeah,
I'm
I
alive.
totally understand. Yes, yes. We take it for granted sometimes.
Yes, so I think each time I explore something new, I feel closer to our essence as a people on this planet. So and and again, yeah, exploring, I want to go to space because it's I think it's just in our human nature to want to explore beyond what we become accustomed to. And each time we explore beyond, it just makes us appreciate where we're at that much more.
Oh,
So
yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I see what you did there. And I completely agree with you because I had a conversation with my friend and we were talking about would living in space, like would it actually be the same human, like are we going to have the same human experience? Which is why I resonate a bit with what David said about what would our grandma think about living in space. It's really crazy. But then being a human being and the human experience of just being alive is about butterflies and it's about flowers and it's about the roof. It's really our human experience is really grounded in our current reality. And living in space, like there's so much restriction. I'm sure even with all the technology to take a couple 100 years for us to like try to recreate Earth technically. So it will make us appreciate Earth better. Yes, thanks for just pointing that out. And David, do you want to go last, or why do you want to go, or why would you not want to go to space? Adding not, just in case.
I didn't know I don't know why you suspect that I don't want to go to space. Uh, because anyway, personally, as a person who can't swim, I don't know how, if I can't swim, I would like to be in a total vacuum in a small tube. Um, the thought scares me personally.
Yeah,
I applaud people like Farmer. You're the bravest people I know. Astronauts, very brave people. Very brave. But that does not mean, however, that I do not think the continent should go to space or
yeah,
that we should physically go to space.
yeah,
So why should we? I look at space as the next frontier for human development, right? Um, Advancement of human consciousness is, I think, one of the most basic and primal instincts that all human beings have. It's the same. It's the reason why we name our children. It's the reason why we try to build what we can when we are still alive. It's the reason
Yeah.
why we explore, because we want to advance our consciousness in the places where it is not. And
Yeah.
look at space as the next frontier for the advancement of human consciousness. So
Yeah.
yes, I would like for Africa to go to space. I wouldn't want
How about
you know,
Would you take a free trip?
no,
Free
me
trip.
personally,
Free trip.
it should come with a very huge insurance and assurances
Yeah.
that I would not only return in one piece, but there will also be a prize waiting for me
I
when I
see.
return.
I see.
Uh,
I see.
my feet belong on terra firma. I farm ground under my feet. Yes, beautiful. Even
Yes.
flying sometimes scares
Yeah.
me out. I'm
Yeah.
thinking,
Yeah. I
why
understand.
aren't my feet on the ground? I belong to the earth. But for those who would like to go to space, I mean, she's slated for 2029, is it?
Yeah. Yeah.
That's just a couple of years from now. 4 years. Oh my
Yeah.
goodness. I pray for you, and absolutely I'm happy for you, but not for me really. I'm good. I'll be fine.
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks for just sharing your experience. And I think I'm just going to take a couple questions. I have some more questions here. And I'm just going to check. Oh yeah, we have some minutes as well to go. So yeah. I'm going to take some questions and then come back to mine. So let's take Mary. Mary, can you go ask your question or your contribution? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nelly. Thank you very much to the panel for the lovely discussion. I am Mary Patience Namugwanya, and I am currently on the moon in an analog astronaut in Kenya, Marsabit, right next to the border of Ethiopia and Kenya. So situation. For me, living in space is not the future, it's the present. Right now, I'm commanding a mission where, as I said, I'm the mission commander. And then on my crew are Kenyans. So we can already see the Pan-Africanism coming together, and we can already see that we are living on the moon. Now, my question to the panel is, how do you think analog space research contributes to living in space? Do you think it's actually useful having analog astronaut missions? If yes, how exactly do they contribute to this? Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for that wonderful question, Mary. Yeah, funny how we've not addressed analog missions at all in the conversation. So I think Toby's a bit familiar with that. Toby, do you want to take that? Yeah.
Yes. I smiled internally hearing that you're in Kenya
Yes,
on
when
that
she said
mission.
analog, I was like, Toby's on the call. Yeah.
So, yeah, they play a direct, one of the most critical functions in understanding space. As for any field we go into, any sport, if you're going to, please correct me if I'm wrong for all the lawyers in the building. I'm going out of my frame of understanding, but I understand you have mock trials and you have different
Yeah.
things that are considered practice that you do that puts you in a situation to kind of anticipate different things you're going to face in the real trial. And same things with any profession you do, you have practice. And when you go into space, because it's so foreign, it's so different, there's a lack of steady, consistent gravity that you're experiencing. Your relationship changes with that, but confined quarters, limited resources. When we go into analog missions, such as what Ms. Mary is in Kenya, you are practicing what it's like to have limited resources and still trying to achieve certain goals. So when you get into those practice things, that's when the people observing can see, oh, as humans, we behave this way and we face this problem, or this technical issue may arise. So when we don't do that practice, we're not ready for the game, which is actually going to space. So I would say analog missions and anything that simulates space activity, that is in the space world, our practice for actually going into space. So for anybody who's in the field, they'll tell you that it's very important, and it's And it also depends on the fidelity and how it's carried out, because
Mhm.
not all practices are equal. So,
Yeah.
but yeah, my
Some
response to
practice.
that, it plays a very critical role.
Yeah, perfect. I was going to say some practice are more equal than others. I think what we need to do is to make sure that we're having the right analog, like the standard analog missions on the continent. At the moment, I'm not very familiar with one at the continental level, like the AU and the rest. I'm not sure there's any analog program or projects going on, but that is something to definitely look out for in the future. And that's why we're having this conversation.
Nelly,
We'll put this.
Nelly, there actually is.
Oh,
There
really? At the
actually
continent
is. Yeah.
by the
Yes,
AU?
it's one of the programs that Mary is part of, and
Oh,
it's a follow-up on another program that I actually advised on about 3 years ago.
oh,
Same
okay.
location in northern Kenya, and yeah, so
By the African
it's
Union? I was
no.
okay.
This one is it was a project by, and I think the lady is Jamaican.
Mm,
She has African
Claire
roots,
Nelson?
so she no. Yeah,
Yeah.
yes, Nelson,
Oh,
yes,
yeah. I'm
that's
familiar
uh,
with yeah,
yes,
the project
Claire Nelson,
by
yes,
Dr. Claire. Just to give
yes.
more details, Mary, maybe if you could post the link or something to people on the call that may be interested in analog missions, that would be great. My brain, because of my research, thinks one way for the when I say Africa, I'm talking about the African Union. I'm sorry, everyone. So, Mary, if you could post that, that would be so good. So, before we take the next questions, oh, Farmer, do you want to say something about that?
Yeah, I just wanted to bring in the perspective how especially analog missions are important for the African continent. Right now, we're trying to reconcile the idea of solving some of the problems we have on Earth, but also building for the next um, frontier when it comes to space. And analog missions are one of the ways that we can actually do that by building capacities and also training future astronauts when we are ready as Africans. We know that we're prepared to take the next necessary step,
Yeah,
right? So that is one way to look at it from that perspective. So definitely well done, Mary. And I hope that we
yeah,
have more analog astronauts so
yeah.
that when we are all ready to go to space, we have people that are ready
People
to
that
come
are
in and
lined up
jump
with
on
the
our rocket.
experience.
Yeah.
Perfect. Perfect. Yes. Thanks so much for that contribution, Farmer. And I'm just going to take some of my questions and then we'll take more questions from the call. Please, if you have any question or contribution, please feel free to raise your hands. Feel free to send us a message. Feel free to send a message to tell us how the conversation is going and if you're learning as well. Just encourage us as well. That would count as a good message. Thank you. So my next question for all the panelists is, can you share a sci-fi movie or book that may perhaps have influenced how you imagine living in space at all? And if this has resonated with you? I don't know if you guys are movies or book people, but yeah, I think this is a really good question. Like, what have you seen? Because you've not gone to space. What have you seen? It's like, I think it's really interesting. Yeah, so could you share that with us? And I'll start with Toby since your mic is on mute, and then we'll go to Farmer and David.
Oh, okay, yeah. So, one of there's a lot of sci-fi films that inspired me to want to explore space, but I would say the one that I can say imagine what living in space would actually be like, that isn't too far-fetched with technology that we don't even have yet, but would be this movie Ad Astra.
Yeah.
It's that film, I think it wasn't based too far into the future, that the technology felt like it's tangible and I can actually see that being what it looks like. So Ad Astra, and then another sign for me that let me know that it influenced me is because there's a subtle feeling of, whoa, it feels like, oh wow, like a little grand, and I can actually put myself in that place. So Ad Astra is a movie. Books, um, not so much so what living in space will be like, but inspiring me to want to do more about space is a book by Dr. Mae Jameson, who was the first
Oh,
African
great.
American lady to
Yeah.
go to space. So her book was called Find Where the Wind Goes, and I read it. It's a book
Find
geared
where the
for
wind
young
goes.
children. Yeah,
Oh,
Find Where the Wind Goes, and it's almost she wrote it herself, and it's takes you through the journey of her life of how she went from where she grew up with her siblings to get into space, and it was a really inspiring thing. But for me, honestly, the thing that drives me the most, or will be music. There's a lot of music out there that has small little themes or words that speak to space.
Yeah,
So,
music.
but
Wow,
anyway,
wow. I
yeah.
didn't think of that. I didn't think of music. But yeah, very good point as well. Yeah. Thank you, Toby. Fama.
Thank you for that question, Nelly. It's a very interesting question because I do love like really watch a lot of like space movie. I'm that girl. So one of the movies that I really love is Interstellar. So it's about like, yeah, the Earth planet collapsing and just human beings trying to find the next habitable planet itself. So for me, that I find very interesting. And another movie is Martian, which in a way also, let's say, relate to me as an African, right? It tells about the story of resilience itself. And I feel that is really connected to being African itself and trying to just be resilient in the environment that we are, especially as David said, not being part of the table, kind of build your own table or force yourself in a way on that table, right? And be part of the game itself. So for me, that is something that is very relatable. A book, someone that I really love is now the Grass Tyson. I don't know if you guys know him. It's more about the space frontier, about exploring space, about human life and how things might evolve. So yeah.
Thank you. Thanks for sharing that with us. Just having this session in case someone wants to find inspiration. Now you have everywhere to look. David, I don't know if you have a
Quite,
follow-up
quite,
to this
quite
question.
unfortunately, Farmer has stolen my movie because I was also going to say Interstellar
Okay.
for the movie that, really gave me this whole thing of going to space. But most importantly, because you see, the movie Interstellar, it just reaffirmed all my fears about space. It's a very unpredictable, totally weird place to be. uh, just weirdness all around, time moving behind and black holes and God knows what. I mean, even the most well-read and prodigious scientists still know less than 1% of what is actually in space,
Yeah,
and yet we want to go there. So in my head, I'm thinking, why do we want to go where we don't know what's there? I mean, why again are we doing this? There's like 1,000 movies on why that's a bad idea, but hey, I guess to each their own.
to each their
As
own.
I
Yeah.
say, yeah, as I said, I actually wrote this somewhere in the chat. I said, space is not my thing because my relationship with gravity is quite healthy and I fear a breakup anytime soon. I'm good. Tell me there's no gravity, I'll be out of the way.
Thank you.
The book was a novel.
Okay.
It was a novel, but kind of it was semi-fictional. I read this in 2011. I was in junior high school, what you would call junior high school. Probably the equivalent of about class 12 for those who are, no, class 11 for those who are in the international system. And there was a book called Space by James Michener. So this book was sort of like an explanation of the American space program. It kind of traced it way back to where it came from, and it was quasi-fictional because the characters were fictional, but it was about real events that actually happened. And I remember it was my first introduction to the very skewed politics of space travel. Like the politics of everything was so intriguing for me at the moment that it gave me the first interest to really look into the politics of policies and how things really, really go. I mean, it says there was an astronaut who was almost stopped from going on one of the Apollo missions, who was almost stopped from being on the roster of astronauts because his wife was deemed to be a vulgar person because she had cussed at someone at some point.
This
And
is
they were
why
saying,
we have feminist
astronauts.
ire. And this is
No, they were
why we
saying
have
astronauts.
this is why we
Astronauts are
have
supposed
women
to
in
be
space
a
programs.
voice. They're supposed to be the best of humanity. You cannot be the best of humanity if your wife curses. It was quite crazy, you know. So
Wow, very
that
interesting
kind of
book. Yeah.
gave me that
Yeah.
idea. So yeah, so that would be it. So Farmer, please
Interesting.
don't steal my
Thanks
my
for
movies
sharing,
next
David.
time. Mm.
Thanks for sharing. So I'm going to take a question from Omoni. She had a hand up. I don't know if you still have your question. And then I have one last round of questions to go again. Omoni, if you're there.
Okay, thank you very much. Good day, everyone, depending on where we are all joining from. Thank you. I really must commend the speakers. They've done a very wonderful job, and I just got a very unique perspective to the space exploration since I've been into the space learning environment, all right? And I would just like to also add that there's something that we all learn in change management, and it is that change will definitely come, and either we like it or not, it will come and it will leave us at the point if we don't join the revolution. I understand and I agree with Mr. David, but I would also like to add with him that I think it's also very important for Africans to choose our own pace, look at our problem, and see how we can solve our problem. How the space, what it really means to us, and not the interpretation of other countries from what I've learned. But my question is, how can we, while we are very careful of being at the mercy or running with the agendas of the Europeans and Americans and other selfish guys on this, how can we still make sure that we remain committed, to leveraging this technology to solve our own problems, designing our own agendas, mapping our own problems, and see how is it possible for us to do things independently as African at this stage, or we don't have a choice, we still have to, work with the existing agendas. Thank you.
Thank you. That's a very layered question. And I would leave it up to maybe David, Toby, Farmer, if you all want to respond in your own way, because I think that's one of the core of this webinar, actually. Yes, we have talked about living in space, but then we have to accept reality in terms of at the continental level. So yes, how do we, in your own opinion, go about that?
Well, you had earlier on sort of asked me to give some kind of background on the things that I was talking about, the laws that I was discussing, that I was talking about, and I believe this question can to do so and to highlight some of the key points.
Yeah.
Now, for us to understand what that question is requiring of us to do, point, but then also from what the law really is. So as I mentioned that there are these treaties, okay, and the treaties are really the agreements that states came up with, and there are five main, not five, 4.5 if you would, but about five treaties that you would say are directly space related. But I'll concentrate on one, the very first one. So as I said, that before a treaty is done, there is negotiation. And this negotiation is what leads to the text of that treaty. There were 13 African countries which signed the very first space treaty, which is called the Outer Space Treaty. There were 13 African countries that signed it on the day it was adopted and opened for signature. 13. This was in 1967. So on the very day that this treaty was opened for signature, 13 African countries signed it. However, there is no record of their contribution to the negotiation of this treaty. Because when these negotiations are happening, they are recorded in what in law we call travaux préparatoires, or the preparatory documents. Those preparatory documents will have the minutes of the meetings, or every single word that was said. You will find it in those documents. We have no record of Africans actually contribute or speaking or giving ideas on what should have happened. The committee that now determines the laws, this treaty is called the UN Committee on the Peaceful Uses of Outer Space. It was founded in 1958, and at its founding, there was at least one African country, which was the United Arab Republic at the time, which now we call Egypt.
Mm.
Okay,
Yeah.
Egypt is left.
I think we lost
Four
David.
African countries.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Sorry for cutting you, David. So sorry for cutting you,
Mm.
but just noticed, yeah, we are a bit tight on time. So you want to maybe,
Yes.
summarize?
Let me just wrap it up.
Yes.
So what I'm trying to say here is this: that even though you could say there was an African or two at this negotiating table, they either said nothing or they were just an observer. While later on you have 13 of them signing, even negotiate. Now, how then do we make sure that we have our own indigenous whatevers, which will also answer the question that I was asked in the chat by, I think, Tando. How we have to, first of all, come together as Africans. Now, Africa is a very complicated continent. We have our differences, but we need to understand that if we do not come together, everyone is going to utilize our differences in order to manipulate and exploit us.
Mm.
Whereas if we can use our differences as the strengths that we have and come together and for stomachs and really think about the continent as a whole and what this means for posterity, then we can start to negotiate our own indigenous approach to outer space. This is exactly what our brothers and sisters in the West did. That despite their differences, they had literally been shooting nuclear warheads at each other just before they sat down and agreed. Despite their many differences, they somehow could sit and agree on how they are going to exploit the rest of the world. If we cannot copy that, if we cannot see what they did, as Africans, leave our spears on the door, enter, agree, and then we can get our spears and beat each other black and blue after agreeing. Then it's going to be very difficult for us going forward.
Wow. Yeah, thank you so much, David. I think in summary, cooperation, internal integration of the continent for space is very important. Yeah, I think this is the point we also try to make in these discussions. And everybody here, most of the young experts here, you will grow up to be the leaders of tomorrow. Please take this thought to heart. Yeah, Farmer, I'm just going to hear from you as well, please.
Yeah, I think I'm going to keep it very short. So just to answer the question, I believe that Africa has to build its own, but it's important to know that independence doesn't mean isolation. We still have to learn to work with other part of the world, right? And it's important to know also that we don't need validation, right? We're already good enough, right? So one thing that I can advise is that it's important for Africa to invest in capacity building, right? Invest in the infrastructure so that we become so damn good that we cannot be ignored, right?
Yeah.
We can see that like countries like China are a problem to some of the superpowers here because they have worked and invest so much on themselves that they cannot be ignored, right? I
Yeah.
think Africa has to come to that point that we build our table, invest so much in ourselves and in the continent in general that the rest of the world cannot ignore what we bring to the table.
Yeah. I think it's the same thing with India, and after the launched their last mission to the moon, and most academic commentators have been showing how yes, there's a lot of focus on India now, and as you know, one of the emerging or in one of the leading space powers. And yes, while we cooperate with others, we work together internally. Yes, that's like that bridge there. So Toby, yeah, I'm just going to ask like one last round of questions. If you can answer all in 1 minute each, just to wrap up the conversation because it's been so interesting. So Toby, I think I was going to ask you some question about the business side of the space industry and all these opportunities with going to outer space. And I know our economy and our space economy is still very young on the continent, but what are your thoughts on, you know, just taking advantage of the ecosystem of human space exploration?
Yeah, and it's connected to this previous question as well, but I think that there are a few examples we can look at. We can look at Australia. They are also building their space industry, and we have connections already established with Australia, so we can really lean on them. We can also lean on our connections in India to really see, and even our like for example, Nasrata, Nigeria Space Agency has made partnerships with India and different places like that. So we can really, you know, see that the groundwork is being made for taking the example and being patient with ourselves to see it through.
Yeah, be patient.
But for one thing, just to make it really quickly for ecosystem, to get ourselves to be seen more as partners, not spectators. If you look at Canada, you know, they made a stamp on the International Space Station by creating a tool that became so vital to so much of the operations on the ISS, which is the Canadian arm.
Yeah.
And the lesson there is we have to do something useful for ourselves, but then that other people also find useful. And how do we do that? And we have to understand what our partner nations are doing, understanding their reasons for going to space, understanding our reasonings for being in further out in space, because I think we're already in space, but being further out exploration. And once we understand that and assess our own goals, we can then see how we want to be involved in that team, the international team. And there's a saying, I'll keep it really quickly. There's a saying that says, in the gold rush, you don't dig for the gold, you make the shovels. And I think that's what Canada did. They made that tool that every nation said, we need this to make our jobs and what we want to do better. So I think it's about us learning what we have, because we have a lot of resources that other nations want. And it's not just about selling it to them, just that, oh, we make money really quickly, then it's done. It's about, oh, what materials do we have? How does it benefit space? And how can we develop that material so that when we're ready and we put it to the international stage, you know, it's there. So like, for example, if we found out that we have really high quality copper all over Nigeria and different African nations, instead of just selling the copper to Apple and Microsoft and say, oh, let's make that money, let's actually use that copper, build our own products that these people need, and then say, okay, we don't want to just sell it to you. We want to be a part of what's going on. We want to explore. We have the cool computer. You have the cool spaceship. Let's work together as opposed to just selling it off. So I think that's what we could do.
Yeah, this is really interesting. And it says, I think this is the same dialogues that are happening at the high level and policy level, where increasingly African experts and African young professionals were saying we need to do something as a continent. we can go to the world and be like, we want to cooperate, we want to sit at a table. You're making all these deals without us. But yeah, if you want to, have a say, then you should bring something to the table. So it's all back. And we can't go have our own table because we are all in space together. So we have to be at the table with other people. So it's very interesting. Well, thank you so much, everybody. Quite a lot more to talk about. I still have questions, but then we're almost out of time. I will try to keep the webinar short and brief and very interesting for those that are going to rewatch. So perhaps we are going to have Reimagining Africa's Future in Space 3. That's going to be next year because we still didn't talk about ethical considerations and some legal considerations and cultural considerations, and even space education. We didn't come to that. So maybe we can revisit that again. But I want to thank Farmer, Toby, and David for their time, and thank everybody for staying this long for the conversation. So please just stay with me a few minutes before you go. Please don't go yet. We still have final reflections from everybody. But I just want to very quickly announce the next webinar. For November 2025, we are going to talk about what is data when we need it. So it's like going way to outer space, but let's come back. Let's come back home to Earth observation. And we're going to talk about disaster monitoring in Africa and disaster management. I think there's a lot of discussion about how we need Earth observation data for early warning, because as most of you may know, Africa is the most vulnerable continent to climate change hazard. We are top when it comes to facing the brunt of the ongoing climate change. So many natural or unnatural disasters going on because of lack of systems. And then EO data is supposed to help us monitor these, provide warning for these, but then we still keep seeing repeated issues on lack of proper information. So what is happening? What are the systems in place? Where is the data when we need it? That is a conversation we're going to be having in November, and I'll be sending more details. So if you're not on our newsletter, please subscribe to our newsletter. Just go online to register for the webinar, and we'll have your email and send you all the updates. My colleague is going to post the webinar WhatsApp group chat. We have a small WhatsApp group chat where we post information on the webinar. I think he should be on the call. I hope, Timothy, if you could help me, thank you so much. And follow us on LinkedIn, follow us on Facebook, follow us on X as well. If you have any questions or suggestions on how to improve this series, just let me know and let us know. If you also have any hosting ideas or any theme ideas, we'll be very happy to accommodate your ideas as well, because we're trying to build an ecosystem here. So thank you so much, everybody. So that is the end, but right before we go, let's take a picture. And I don't know if I've left out anything that anybody wanted to quickly address for my speakers. Toby, Farmer, David, any final word, final reflections, final encouragement, or just goodbye? That works too. So